welcome back to Faith and Fire. I'm excited to talk to you today, not because we have an exciting topic, but we have a topic that's needed. Today, we're going to talk about suicide and how it impacts our faith and our communities. And it's such an important topic because suicide is one of those things that sometimes we don't talk about in the church. Sometimes we don't talk about in relation to our faith, but it has a profound impact. And it impacts not only us, but the communities around us, how we feel about those communities. And it can be something that has a lasting effect on us. So we want to unpack that today and have a conversation. So with me today, I have three great guests who all have some experience on the topic, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Lauren Hamadou, and I lost my father at 13 from suicide.
Hi, my name is Mike Israel, and I lost a really close friend to suicide when I was 15.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Alicia Washington. I lost my husband to suicide 7 years ago.
Wow. Okay. So we're going to have a conversation today, and we're going to dive into the topic. Okay. So let's get started. And Alicia, I'd love to start with you and your story. So you said that you lost your husband to suicide.
Yes.
Which is a loss that I just can't fathom. And tell me, how did that impact you? I mean, tell me your story.
Okay. So 7 years ago, there's a lot of details, but basically, he just didn't come home one night. And I spent like the whole day like calling people, trying to find out where he was. And, I honestly never thought that's what happened. Like I knew we were under a lot of stress, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but we were, there's just a lot going on, and I could tell he was very stressed. There was a lot, but I would have never thought that. Like I honestly thought, I called jails all night long. I called like just hospitals. I called like any place I could think of. Yeah. And when the police officers finally called me, and they're like, they asked they just asked if I was home, and they came over to the house, and I had all my friends there already and family. And they told me that they found him in his car and with a gunshot wound. And I just never would have thought that,
Yeah.
Even earlier in the day, my mom asked me, she's like, do you think, could he have done something like that? And I was like, no way. But when it happened and I was told that that's how it happened, I also didn't question it. Like, as painful as it is, I've never questioned it, only because when I looked at everything that we had going on and I looked at how bad it was, and honestly, I even found out financially it was even worse than I knew, that things that I knew, I could see then not necessarily why but I could just see that he was under a lot. Like, there was a lot of things he was acting differently. When I looked back at everything, I was like, you could see stuff, the signs, but when you're in it, you just don't see it. You're in it. You're just like, I was praying and just checking on him, but also didn't want to push him. And there's just so many things that are happening. But in the end, we were under a lot of financial stress, like very deep hole. And I think he had lost, like he had kept trying to fix things and help things. And it just kept, like, it was the perfect storm of just crap. Like things just kept happening that were just pushing him into like a deep kind of hopelessness, a dark hole that he couldn't get out of. And it was very hard. It took me years. It's still, it still obviously hurts, and there's still a lot of stuff there, but it was one of the hardest things I've ever been through. I've never felt a pain like that. Like it was a struggle. And for all of our friends and family, it was a shock. Like not a single person saw, like he had so many people around him, so many friends, so much family. Like we are very close, tight knit. Like nobody ever would have guessed that. And I think that is why I want to talk about it. Like it's so hard for everybody to deal with, and we blame ourselves. Like even the friends, like every single person who was in his life thinks they could have done something to fix it. And I think that's why we don't talk about it, because that's shame and guilt and right. And so we just like, nobody wants to deal with those kind of emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. So yeah.
So when that happened, how did that impact your faith?
I just turned to God. Like,
Yeah.
I've always had a heart for God. Like, my mom has just been so good about, instilling that in all of us. And it's just something that's been a part of how I was raised. The people in my life, like my family, his family, like we really that's who you turn to. Like, and even when all of this was going on, I was praying, and even though it happened, I just turned to God. Like, I felt like the only answer is him. Like, I don't know why. I'm never going to have the answer to that. But I do know who would pick me up. I do know who's going to comfort me. I do know who's going to keep me safe, basically. Yeah. And I felt like a grace that I've never felt. Like, I could tell people were praying for me. That's so wild to me to say. But like, I noticed like a year and a half after, when people kind of stopped. Like, wow. you can feel that. I don't know what the word is, but you can just like feel people are praying for you. Yeah, that covering. Like, you can really feel it. And I felt it also when people stopped praying. And that's just life. People are going to move on. But I just knew God. Like, I've always just turned to God. Like, I just felt like that was the answer. And I don't know how to explain it. It's just something that has always been really important to me.
That's beautiful. And it's amazing that you had that strong foundation, so that when something that traumatic happens, that you turn to him. Because I know that that's not always the experience. That's not always what resonates with people or what hits them when something traumatic happens.
Yeah, we want to blame God or, think something's wrong. But it's just life. Life has, I would have never thought that would happen to me in my life. Like, I'll try to be quick, but I'm the type of person that, like, I grew up really blessed. I'm just always been so blessed. Like, I've always had amazing people in my life. Like, I've just had a really great upbringing. Like, I've been blessed, and I always felt like if you did the right thing and you did things a certain way, like something like that would never happen to you or to me. Like, I just really never saw that coming. Yeah. And when it just made me question like everything. But that's just it. We can't control, we can't control other people, and we can't control the things that happen in our life, but we do control how we react, what we do with that information, what we do with that loss, just helping the people who all are going through it as well.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And I love how something so deep and profound had an amazingly positive impact on your faith.
Yes. So,
Lauren, I wanted to come to you next. What is your story? What is your experience? And how did it impact you?
I have had years of therapy. I've had years of healing. I've had years of re-healing. I mean, so much of what you said obviously hit home with me. When somebody gets to the darkness or gets to the point where their only outlet is to kill themselves, we have to understand that it's past a decision that they can make.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. And we, with healthy minds and healthy hearts, can't understand that. But we're not living in their day-to-day darkness. Mm. And I think the ripple effect is something else that you had mentioned, that it affects so many for so long. And when I look back at my dad, I'm sad that that's the point that he got to. He was the life of the party.
Yeah.
He would make friends with anybody and everybody. And he was everybody's best friend. And to me, that's such a blessing. And it's such an honor to carry, because I feel like I have that part of him in me. But it also makes me so sad for you to be so happy and so warm and so friendly in such a big presence to so many people and to be so lonely. That's something that I've always tried to wrap my mind around. And obviously, me understanding the loss of my dad, very similar to what you said, I couldn't understand when my mom told me, I was like, no, like I can just pick up the phone. I can just call him. Like, no, he didn't do that. He wouldn't do that. Like, what do you mean? Like, I could not, obviously at 13, right? You don't talk about suicide. I mean, funny enough, at 20, at 30, people don't talk about suicide.
Nobody
people
talks about
do not talk about the shame, the guilt. And that's such a big one because so many people, and even me as a child at 13, I remember I was going to call him the night before. And there was a whole background to what happened prior to him doing what he did, obviously. And I remember I was going to pick up the phone and call him that night, and I didn't. And what kind of guilt does that leave for a child, right? Like, oh my God, if I was the last voice he heard, maybe I could have changed it, right? Like if I had just picked up the phone, I could have stopped him. But now as an adult, I know I couldn't stop him, right? And I also look back, and I know this is kind of touchy for a lot of people to hear, but for me, I would never bring him back. That's selfish for me to bring somebody back to live in such darkness for what? For my benefit? That's not fair. That's not a life, right? And to me, the thing that helped me, we didn't grow up in a church. I grew up very Catholic. And when I say very Catholic, my dad was Catholic, my mom was Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, right? That was the religion I claim. But we went to church here and there. My mom instilled faith in me, understanding the foundation of God and who he is and the greater power to it. And funny enough, that's what saved me. That's what I fell back on, even at such a young age. Knowing that he's with God, right?
Yeah.
And then with that comes controversy. Because in the Catholic faith, suicide's the ultimate sin. I didn't know that, right? So in my 13-year-old little brain, I'm telling myself like, okay, like he did this, it's bad, but he's with God.
He's in heaven.
He's in heaven. I get to see him again.
Yeah.
That was trying to wrap my little brain around it, right? Like that was the way that I was able to tell myself, this isn't the end. It's not over. There is going to be another story. I didn't get an ending, and this is going to be my ending with him, right? And I couldn't tell you who it was, but I remember somebody telling me, oh, he committed suicide? Oh, he's in hell.
Yeah.
How old were you when someone said that to you?
I was 13.
That was when you were 13?
I was 13. And I didn't know. Well, I'm like, what do you mean? What? Hold on. And then I had to relearn the story that I told myself. I had to re-heal the wound that somebody just ripped open.
Which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Because the only way to survive this kind of pain is the story you believe.
Yes.
Right? Like
yes.
what you get right after that story, that's it.
Yes.
And if somebody changes that for you, that's like, no, this is how I'm surviving. Like, this is how I'm getting through my grief.
Even now.
This story.
Even now, 7 years later, 20 years later, even now, when I find little pieces of my truth that's different, it opens up a wound and I have to start to re-heal.
Yeah.
And that people don't understand. And sometimes it's said in passing where they don't mean it to be a comment that sticks with you, but you hear it and it hurts on a much deeper level than somebody would have intended it to.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered your question. I think you asked me, but there was so much of what she said. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I was like, I need to say that. Like, so yeah, I don't know if I answered what you needed, but
And then we were just having a conversation, and I love Oh my gosh, I love everything you said. Was that someone in the church who said that to you, or where did that come from? Family member?
It was probably a family member or a friend and it's actually kind of crazy. Everyone wants to place blame, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to take blame, but everyone wants to place blame.
Mm-hmm. But it's hard to place blame on somebody you love, right? Like, so that person that did that, that's how they died. Like, it was not, I have a couple avenues that I put if I had anger, like I was angry, but I put it towards those other avenues. Cause I was like, I can't be mad at him. You know what I mean? Like it's, that's somebody you like love and you have such a totally different outlook. And so that kind of anger, like if somebody's in a car accident, you can be angry at the other person, or you can be angry at the accident, or you can be angry at a stoplight. Like there's so many other things you can blame. And in this case, it's like, who can you blame? What do you blame? And that's a hard thing to come to terms with, like but that's why it's like, we need answers instead of just this person made this decision. They're selfish. They're this. It's not that. Like they're mentally, they need help. They're in a dark place. They're depressed. Like they're hopeless. They really felt like there was no other answer.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to talk about more, because I think people do make assumptions. And I know we need to go to you too,
no,
but
you're fine.
One more thing, just to go off what you said, like even in the Christian community, like my mom told me growing up that you would go to hell if you committed suicide. So when he passed, I had a pastor who came to my house and I was crying and I was talking to her and she's like, no, it does not say that in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it changed right then and there. This was in with like 2 days of him passing. That changed my head. Like, oh, okay. Like you know what I mean? Like that's okay. So he's going to heaven. Like this is not what I think. But we were in California and we had a conversation with another family, and the grandma of the family said the same thing. She said, growing up, my family told me that, or my mom told me that you would go to hell if you commit suicide. This is the problem, right? Because there's no talk about it. It's just, if you do this, this is what happens. And it's all because of fear of losing us.
Yeah.
But that's, even when I brought it up to my mom, she's like, well, I didn't want you guys to do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then nobody talks about like what brings people to this place.
Yeah. How much did it free you when that person said that to you?
I was just crying. Like it just made me, and it wasn't like a big thing, but it like that I kept thinking about, but it was something that was a thought. Like it bothered me.
Yeah.
And when she said that, I was just like, oh, okay. And so then when I brought it up to my mom, she's like, well, no, I just didn't want you to. And it's just like, whoa, right? You go your whole life thinking something, believing something. And it seems like such a far-fetched thing for a lot of Christian families. I think like, it's just like, that's just not going to happen to us.
Yeah.
Because we believe in God, or because of this or that, like that just won't happen. But that's, again, the problem. Like we don't talk about it enough. People don't talk about it enough. People don't talk about mental health enough. There's not enough. Going on.
And just to add to that really quick, and then we'll move to the next topic. And again, I'm faithful. I'm not very religious, so I can't properly quote the Bible, but I've always been told God is all loving and all forgiving, right? So to me, for anyone who thinks that you go to hell for committing suicide, why would God punish somebody who's sick? Right.
Who's already in pain.
Who's already in pain.
Hurting.
Yeah. Like I can't wrap my mind around why that is the go-to comment when it comes to speaking of suicide and faith or in God, where no, he would understand the struggles and the demons that individual
was facing.
Is fighting and facing.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one of those things I just always repeat to myself it's okay. He's okay. Mm-hmm. He is in a better place. And so I just wanted to add to that too, because I think it's so profound.
Yeah. I like that. I like how you articulated that and kind of brought it together. Okay, Mike, now I know you've been chomping at the bit. Tell us your story.
I've been waiting.
So patient.
Yeah, so my experience was when I was in high school, 15 years old, my friend Sean, we've been friends since second grade. We had all these plans. We were on the basketball team. We had plans to run the basketball team, and it was September 19th, 1994. My dad was like, all right, let's go. Let's get ready to go to school. And we would pick Sean up every day and pick him up. And that day, nothing seemed off. Nothing seemed weird. And I went to school. So I'm from Boston. And I went to school out in the burbs. So our bus ride was like 45, 50 minutes. And he and I would sit next to each other on the bus. And that morning, same routine, same everything. We get to school and we're walking through the hall. So he's like, all right, man, I'll see you later. See you later. I played football, so I had practice. And that night I came home from practice and I drove past his house and I saw all the cop cars and fire trucks. And I didn't think it was at his house because there, other houses next to it. So I'm riding down the street with my dad, and I see a friend of mine outside playing basketball. And he's like, hey, something happened at Sean's house. I'm like, okay, cool. Go home, I eat, check in with my mom, talk to my mom and dad about my day. Then they take me down to Sean's house. As soon as I walk in, his brother grabs me, snatches me up, and is like, what happened? Why did he do it? I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. So then they tell me he blew his head off. And I was like, what? And then there was another friend of ours who would walk home with us. And I saw him and I was talking to him. And he was like, hey, we got home from school. And so it was us three. And we normally, when we get home from school, if I wasn't have football practice, we get on the phone because back then we had the landlines with calling. so yeah, it's like, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? So
Telling your age.
Yeah. Hey, that's okay. I'm like, fine wine. No. But he was like, regular routine. We're on the phone. But then he said, Sean just started talking crazy. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to end my life. And he found his dad's shotgun. And my friend, Jamil, heard him click it. And he put it to his chest. And he said, I'm just going to blow my chest out. And he was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And Jamil, for him, he knew the words verbatim. He was like, I'm not going to do it because, and no offense to anybody, but if it doesn't take, he said the retarded word. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then Jamil was like, no, I'm on my way over. Hung up, went over, nobody answered. We're 14, 15, so we're not going to break in. He just went back home. So then Sean's parents came home and his mom walks in the house and she noticed an odor because, when you pass, your body emits some things and the gun residue and smoke. She walks up to his room. He's laying on his bed. She thought he was sleeping, but when she turned, she saw pieces of him in blood. And so that was that. And for me, when it happened, I went to school the next day. I was angry.
Yeah.
And I wasn't angry at Sean, but I was angry at other students. Other students who were like, oh, boo-hoo, blah, and all of that, because I'm like, you never interacted with him. He didn't know you, but here you are and all of that. So my anger was directed towards them. And being 14, 15, you're not quite that mature, so you don't understand. And so that particular year was a tough year because I lost an uncle and I lost another friend. All three gunshots.
Wow.
And so my parents were like really freaking out. So that was my first experience with therapy. And I remember in one of the sessions, the therapist was a Christian therapist. And he did ask me about, do I think he's in hell? And 15-year-old kid, I'm like, I don't know. I'm just here because my friend is no longer here. And we had these plans and I'm hurting. So that year, my parents, like, we got to go to church. But being 15, I didn't pray like I pray now.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the faith like I was now. I knew the faith because my grandmother, who started up the church we attended, my mom, who's the missionary of the church, my dad, who's heavily involved, I knew it, but I would go to church and do like most 13-year-olds. I'm going to the store in the back pew sleeping. But I will say what that did, it prompted me to where I am now. So I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed therapist. And when I get a client who has suicidal ideation, it's like, I'm taking you regardless. Like, I'll turn clients away if it's outside of my scope. But once I hear the word suicide, it's near and dear to me. And I take them on. And like you guys were saying, there doesn't need to be a reason to be afraid to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because if we talk about this, what is the worst that can happen?
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's, and you always tell me, you always tell me that this isn't, but it's the emotion. Like I am terrified, even to this day, to feel that. And I know what you're going to say, but to feel that emotion, right? Because it's so strong. And it brought me to my knees. It broke me. I cried every day for 2 years, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like every day. You couldn't take me to lunch. Anything I did, it's like eventually going to turn into me crying. Like, it just was what it was. It's a lot to handle. But that's part of it. And I think, again, it's all stuff we've talked about, like the feelings that it makes us feel, because that person's not here anymore.
Right.
But we're all suffering and we're all trying to figure out what happened. And we're all trying to get answers to questions we'll never get the answer to. So we don't talk about it because it just is easier. It's just easier.
And I think when you say it's tough about it, coming from a therapist perspective, it's that word of acceptance. And in therapy, we call it radical acceptance of what is. And it's like these individuals, they were in a place that they were so hurt, so lonely, that this was their best way to escape that. And us who are still living, we struggle to accept that. And if we can get to a place where it's like, okay, I'm going to accept that why question could probably lessen.
Yeah.
But then again, us as the living humans, we don't want to accept that.
Right.
And
Nobody wants,
No one.
We want to
that.
like hope that someday another answer is going to come.
Yeah.
And it's just not like, it's too hard to accept that answer.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said, because I hadn't thought about it that way. Is the only way we could fully understand what decision they made, even if we were them and the same person, we have to be in that dark place that you talked about. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to go to that dark place and we don't want to find ourselves in that dark place. But absent of that, we're just not going to be able to understand. So that radical acceptance is really the only option at that point. Is you have to accept that it is something that you're never going to understand from the perspective that they had.
And here's here's an equation for radical acceptance. Accepting what is, right? So here's the equation. Pain plus non-acceptance equals suffering. Mm-hmm. Pain plus acceptance equals pain. Regardless, you're going to have pain. But if you get that acceptance, you'll have pain, but you'll have growth. Because if you accept it, it now moves to, okay, what can I do to cope? Whereas if you stay in the suffering, you're still in woe is me. I'm sad. I don't want to do this. So acceptance doesn't mean, hey, it happened. I'm good. I'm going to live life. Acceptance is, yeah, I'm still in pain. I'm hurt, but this is what I'm going to do to cope.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do to grow and move. Not necessarily move on, but continue living life. Because suicide, we never move on. Like here it is, almost 30 years later for me. So I'm from Boston. He's buried in Boston. Every time I go home, I always go to his grave. I spend no less than 45 minutes chopping it up with him, telling him how my life is. I'm at that place where I still don't understand why you did it, because there was no note, no nothing. And I'm hurt, I'm in pain, but I'm growing. And I accept that you did this, and that's helping me cope and move on. Not move on, but live life.
Yeah.
Acceptance, I think that's the way that you just explained that. I really love that. You're accepting what happened, but every stage of your life, you have to re-accept what happened, right? I graduated. I had to accept the fact my dad was not going to be there.
Oh, yes.
Right? I got married. I had to accept the fact that he was not going to be there. On top of the fact, and this is the other problem that in my experience, right? I have people who were in his life who fill in the blanks with what he would have thought, right? What his opinion would have been, what he would have done. So I don't know if I should probably touch on this or not, but I am in an interracial relationship, marriage. I've been married to my husband for 10 years now. And my dad made it very clear, very early on, that he would not accept me dating, marrying, or having children with a Black man. That was in that stage of his life, right? So I get married. I find the love of my life. We have 3 beautiful children. And we have formed an incredible union between the two of us, right? And I tell myself he would be happy. So it goes 2 ways, right? I tell myself what my dad would say. He would accept this because he would see the true happiness in my soul, in his daughter.
Yeah.
He would fall in love with his grandchildren, regardless of the race, religion, or whatever it was, right? But then I have people who were in his life at that point when he was in his darkness, and he stood on the grounds of that, and they say he wouldn't have accepted that. He wouldn't have accepted you.
And they feel the need to tell you that?
Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say that. I was like, they could keep that to themselves.
A lot. And as a child, I think we all have different experiences, right? And that's a wound that has been reopened on so many cases for so long. And I've come to stand on the ground of, you don't get to tell me what my dad would say because you're not him and he is not here. Right? You let me make my happy story up in my head. Yep. You let me, because I like to think he's in heaven looking down on me, not sick, not depressed, not drinking. He is healthy. He has a clear mind now, right? So it is a wound that is reopened. It doesn't ever go away. You learn to cope with it at different stages of your life. My children, I am now at a stage in my life where my kids are asking about my dad. They know my dad is in heaven, right? They my dad was brain sick, and I'm going to talk to them at an age appropriate level because mental health is so important to talk about. And it is not going to be an elephant in my room that we cannot address, that I am embarrassed of, because it's important to understand, especially if mental health is genetics, right? We need to talk about, you're not fighting these demons on your own. And I'm going to share the strength I have found in my 20 years of healing to help them, right? And I am on a new journey of my life to figure out, how do I talk about my dad? Because trauma does something to our brains, right?
For sure.
There's so much I have a hard time remembering my childhood. I have a hard time remembering the good because so much of it was shut out because all I was trying to do was survive. Right? And so now I'm trying to reinvent my memories. So, and my dad, and not just remembering him in the dark light, because it's easier to hate somebody than it is it's just easier to not hate, because I don't hate my dad and I've never hated my dad, but it's easier to protect yourself from that,
right?
And just stay an arm's length, right? But I want to be able to share my dad's legacy with my children in a different light. And so that's the new journey I'm on. And that's opening up a whole bunch of new wounds that I'm now having to figure out. How do I do this as a how old am I? 32-year-old woman with children, right? How do I do this? How do I take on this next journey? And it doesn't go away.
But I think that's it. Talking again is just honestly, like, I can't say it enough. Like, we have to talk about it. I've went to a walk once, and this is totally like, I met a lady. She lost 2 sons to suicide within, it was like 8 years, 10 years. And it blew my mind, right? Because it's like, again, I'm already hurting from this. Like, it blew my mind that people who have seen this, like in their family, like saw that everybody go through it once. And I think, and I don't know for sure, but I just think part of it is because we all just sweep it under the rug, and people who, like younger people in our lives, don't have answers. They just know what happened, or they figure it out, and then nobody wants to go into depth about it. It's just like, oh, that happened, but like, just cover it up, basically. Because if we talk about it, we're afraid that they're going to maybe get that idea or something. But I think the problem that I think it's actually more, if we talk about it, then they know that it's okay to talk about it.
Yes.
So quick thing. I'm going to touch on something you said, but what you just mentioned. The thing is to talk about it. What is the worst that can happen if you talk about it? Think about that. If I have this conversation with my kids, with loved ones, with friends, what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe a few tears, but the message is out. So why are individuals scared to talk about it?
We treat it like it's an illness. And if you say it to someone, they're going to catch the illness. Like, all of a sudden, this person who wasn't thinking about suicide before, all of a sudden catches the suicide bug.
Yeah.
But here's the thing with suicide. Most people don't know this, but suicide is now a diagnosis.
Really? Is it in the DSM?
DSM-5.
Wow.
A few years ago, suicide behavior disorder. It's now a diagnosis because this is how prevalent it is. Like, I don't know the statistics on the how many people do it, but me being a therapist, as I mentioned, I work with several clients who have suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I want to say October, I am working with 3 youths who attend a high school. I'm not going to put the high school out there, but in September, there was a student, went to school, jumped off the school, committed suicide. Yeah. And it was like, these students come in and we talk about it, and they're like, yeah, I hear it all the time throughout school. I do therapy with another therapist, and she works in a school, and she sees it, hears it all the time. Yeah. So suicide is something that is huge now. And so again, what is the fear to talk about it? Because if we look at fear to talk about it, fear is just false evidence appearing real. We have no evidence to fear. Like, if you fear something, it's our anxious thinking. And if we look at that, it's, what evidence do I have to this thought? So if anybody listening to this, if you have fear about talking to people about it, challenge that fear. What evidence do you have to that fear? If your fear is, oh, I don't want to talk about it because I'm going to trigger this person, what evidence do you have to trigger?
And that happens a lot.
Yeah. And in my experience in doing the work that I do, individuals who have thought about suicide, when somebody talks to them about it, it calms them down. I'm one of those, she can tell you, I try to be nice to everybody. I'll say hi to people because you can walk past a stranger, say hi, and just like that, that makes their day. Yep. Yeah. So if we're in a group of loved ones and there's fear, apprehension to talk about suicide, why? Because again, fear is simply anxious thinking, and it's false evidence that appears real.
But I think for other people, there's so much that we all have to say.
Yeah, that's great.
It's just such a, but I think for people, like when I tell people that's how he passed, the reaction that I get is usually most of the time, they are worried that they're going to upset me. So they change the subject.
End of conversation.
Every time.
Yeah.
And if I would have told them he died from cancer, or if I would have told them he died from car accident, or if I would have told them he died from all of these other things, there's a different reaction. But when it's what I tell them, it's always them trying to, most of the time, like some people will kind of ask me questions, but most of the time they don't want to ask me questions. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to upset me.
Yeah.
But any death would upset me. Like any way he would have died, I'd be upset. Like this isn't, so to me, like it's all, and I will say, no, we can talk. Like if you can, like we can talk about it, because it has to be like, you have to be able to do that.
And it's interesting because you said they're afraid to trigger you. And it's like, well, I'm hearing in this conversation, you're already triggered all the time.
Triggered.
Right.
And so there's really nothing to lose in this situation. But only the best thing we can do is have a positive outcome where we help somebody else.
Again, what's the worst that can happen if you have a conversation? What's the worst that can happen in any conversation? Not just suicide. Any conversation, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Or uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, no.
And how do you grow?
Yes.
I just like messing with him.
How do you grow?
But
How
it's
do you
real.
By doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in reality, when it comes to suicide, I think it is so rare for somebody to commit suicide when they haven't thought about it or threatened it before. So if we talk about it, then we are letting them know we see them, we hear them, right?
Yep.
And that can change it on some level. Maybe not every time, but if you have somebody who's thinking about it in secret to themselves, but you talk about it out loud, they're like, oh, they can feel seen, they can feel heard.
Right.
Yeah.
But we also have to hear, we have to listen. Because like I said, most people, my dad, that wasn't, when he did it, it wasn't the first time he threatened it. Right. So then you run into it becomes the boy who cried wolf. Oh, well, you said it before, you're not going to do it. Oh, you said it before, you're not going to do it. And I think with children, this is really big. Right? I don't think children understand the ramifications, the true ramifications of suicide. They don't understand the permanence of death. They don't get it. They can't. Their brains cannot comprehend it. Right? They see it, they hear about it, they talk about it. It's about attention. Right? So what are they saying to get our attention? What are they doing to get our attention? What are we not seeing? So talking about it, letting them know the permanent decision that is made when that's done, there is no undoing it, right?
It makes it.
Yeah. You're
easy.
addressing the elephant in the room. And the other thing, when I know as a mom, right, okay, how do I talk to my kids about it? Because I'm not going to lie to them. I've never been one to lie. I think it is important that it's age appropriate. I don't want to push my trauma onto them. And the kids actually taught me, crazy enough, don't they always? They came home. My son, he was, oh God, I want to say he was kindergarten, maybe first grade, but they were learning about Van Gogh. And I was, okay, tell me about Van Gogh. Like, what did you learn? And he's like, well, he was brain sick. Never had I heard that idea of explaining suicide as somebody being brain sick. Because we know, cough, cough, I'm sick, right? We understand that because we can see them coughing. But mental illness, it's hard to understand because we can't see it. I mean, unless it is a dramatic, like, schizophrenia or whatever, where it's really prevalent. Mental illness, depression, it isn't always like that. It is.
Yeah.
A wolf in sheep's clothing, right? It's those of us that sit around every day talking where we struggle with our own depression or our own funk or whatever that is. And when my child explained that to me, I'm like, oh my God, this is how I can explain this about your grandpa. And that was a window of conversation that I was able to have with him. Oh, Bubba, yeah, you're right. That is what happened with Van Gogh. You know how grandpa died? Well, grandpa was brain sick because they would always ask me, well, how did he die? I'm not going to tell him, oh, he shot himself. That's too much. It's not age appropriate. But at that moment, I was able to take that piece of information and explain to him how somebody can be brain sick and how that affects them, right? Yeah. Now that conversation will develop over time, but it's all about talking.
Yeah. And just you say listening, like to be completely honest, and I say this all the time, if he would have told me that that's what he was thinking, who I was at the time would not have reacted well.
Yeah.
I would not have reacted well. I would have probably been crazy. I would have been like texting him all the time. Where are you going? What are you doing? I would have been all up in his business. And honestly, again, the person I was at that time, I would have probably told him like, you just need to pray about it, or you're just this, or it'll get better, or it's going to be okay, or things will work out. Because like what I know now, if I would have, but I know he didn't tell me, and I know he didn't tell people in his life because nobody would have reacted the way he needed. You know what I mean? Even just to listen, we wouldn't have listened. We're all going to just be like, no, it's okay. You're fine. Or when you talk to men, it's like, oh, man up. Like, it's going to be like, you're going to be great. Like you're being ridiculous. Like, basically you're being ridiculous. Your feelings don't count. The way you feel is wrong. And you should change how you feel. You just need to pray. And not that I'm saying I believe strongly in prayer. I'm not saying that. But when somebody's depressed like that and they need help, we're all here to help each other. Like having somebody in your life you can talk to, or a mental health therapist, like going to somebody. But I know if he would have talked to me at the time, I would not have been easy to talk to. And so listening, being open to talk to people, like letting them tell you and keeping your mouth shut and letting them just talk.
So that's so important. And I think that's where I want to bring our conversation as we come to a close is, how do we have those conversations in an open fashion? I love that you are self-aware enough to know that that version of you may not have been the version of you that could have heard that and responded in the way you would like to. So how do we have those conversations, whatever age that may be? And how do we make sure that we are in a space where we are listening, we are, not causing more trauma as, people come to us, and how do we do that?
I would just say that knowing, respecting, and understanding that it's their feelings. Like if it's a friend or family member, what'll happen is our emotions will get involved.
Yeah.
So like when people come to me for therapy, I have no emotional ties.
Yeah.
I'm listening, I'm hearing, I'm taking notes to point out things. So if it is your loved one, your family member, just remember it's their feelings, and try as hard as you can not to put your feelings on, so you can listen to them, so you can not only listen, but hear them, because there's a difference between listening and hearing. And so that would be, I don't like to say advice, that would be my encouragement.
Yeah.
Is, okay, this is their feelings. They're coming to me with their feelings. Let me hear them. Not just listen, but let me hear, because when you hear, you can internalize, and okay. So that would be my encouragement.
Oh, I like that. It's interesting because my son is 13 now, and one of the things we started doing is watching 13 Reasons Why. And we've been having conversations about it to talk about what happened, how people are feeling, mental health. And that's been important to me. I don't know that it's enough, but I think it's a start of the conversation, because now it's more normalized. Because I don't know if we're talking about the same situation, but I did hear a school that he's interested in going to, the young lady jumped off of the roof. And we were able to have a better conversation about that because we had that context. And I'm like, you remember 13 Reasons Why? Like, it has nothing to do with the school. It has nothing to do with any of that. You remember the stuff that she was going to, and all of the stuff that was going on behind. And so we were able to anchor to something age appropriate that helped us have that conversation around it. And it didn't get swept under the rug. It wasn't just oh, you'll be fine,
Right.
And then, I just want to piggyback off of that real quick, and then I'll be quiet so the ladies can jump. But anyone who is a parent out there and have questions of when should I have this conversation? When should I have that conversation? I'm going to encourage you to look up Erickson's stages of development.
Ooh.
Erickson's stages of development. There's 8 stages in life. We all fall into a category. Researching that, reading that can help you formulate, okay, my son, my daughter is this age. This conversation is appropriate. So if you have those questions as a parent of when I should, just look up Erickson's 8 stages of development, and you can discern if it's right for you.
That's perfect.
Nice little tip. I'll have to make sure I remember to link that.
She's like, thank you. Just got to work on that.
So how else do we have that conversation? I mean, maybe even in adulthood, how do we have that conversation and open up?
One thing that I did this is kind of sort of basic, honestly, but during COVID, we obviously saw a huge mental health crisis. I don't think it's new. I think it was just exposed on a different level. And I think more people may have suffered from it and been more aware of their sufferings, given the environment that we were in. And I just reached out to my team and I wrote them an email, and it was around my dad's anniversary. And I acknowledged the environment that we were in, the challenges that people were facing. I knew what I was struggling with, and I shared my dad's story with them. And I was uncomfortable sending it. I was anxious, but I hit send. And the response that I got from it was mind-blowing. I had 2 team members reach out to me. One who shared his own story with someone that they loved that they lost from suicide. And we talked about it. And you feel so alone in your battle that you forget that there are other people out there that share similarities, and you trauma bond over it, right? Like you can talk through and be heard. And the response that I got from just a simple email, the positivity that I got from that, the thanks that I got from it just for talking about it was huge to me. So to me, it's just putting yourself out there if you're okay with it, letting it be known. I am very open with talking about my dad's story because I'm not alone. We are not unicorns. I'm not the only one that this has ever happened to. And that's, I think my biggest piece of advice is listen. Listen, not to respond, but right. Actually listen to what's being said, and share our stories, because there's so many people out there that have experiences like this.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like there's just like so much I don't even know what to end with. But I think for people who may be thinking about it, and I haven't had these thoughts, so I don't know, but you know, if you ever have something in your head, and if you ever known, like, once I say this out loud, it's real. Like, it's so much more real, right? And so if you don't say something and it's just constantly being fed, like just the thoughts are just being fed and they get bigger and you get more depressed, you get more hopeless, and there's just not a single person who's going to understand. I think that makes it, I think once you say something out loud, that makes it, you know what I mean? Like, then you have to talk about it. Then you have to say why. Then you have to explain your thoughts instead of just like, no, I'm the only person that's, you know what I mean? Like, just constantly just basically being shut down and alone. And then it goes into, yes, then the people around you. If you see somebody who's hurting, or you see that they're acting different, or you see that things are a little off, or you know that their life has changed drastically, don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to push them. Like, I will say that I was afraid to ruffle more feathers. Mm-hmm. Like, I could see he was under a lot of stress. And to me, I didn't want to keep asking questions and keep bugging him but I do feel like, yes, do it. Because if you love that person and you know that they're acting different and you know something's not right, like, it's okay to just be like, yo, like, what's going on? Like, we need to talk. Like,
let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. And then the more that families who have gone through this, the more that friends, the more that people who have gone through this kind of loss talk about it, it will make people feel more comfortable. I think it's so important. And then always, when it comes to like bringing it back to God, like, trust God. Like, yes, things happen all the time. Destruction happens all the time. Death happens all the time. But in the end, like, turn to him, you know, even in your pain, even in the good, even in the bad. So like, all of that, turn to him and let the people in your life help you. And if you don't have somebody in your life that can help you, you know, seek somebody. Because there's plenty of people out here that are here to help us get through this journey. We're not supposed to do it alone, as much as I actually don't even love people. But we do need each other. And just like, just us talking, and just all of us sharing our story, that's a little bit of healing for us. And it's going to be healing for other people. Yes. And so, just say it out loud.
One more thing. For those who are contemplating or have an apprehension about therapy, you don't have to have a mental health illness. Therapy is a place for you to heal. We'll listen to you vent. I've had sessions where I didn't say anything my sessions are 53, 55 minutes. I didn't say anything. They just come in, blah, 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 blah. And then
I've cried.
I always ask, how are you feeling? And great. So therapy, you don't have to have a mental illness. You don't have to have anything that's wrong. It's your place to heal. So however you define that word heal, that's what therapy is for you.
I love this. And I think that's just the word for today. This conversation was healing. And so I want to thank all of you for joining me as we have this conversation today, for just opening up and sharing your experience. And I know there are going to be people out there who just relate wholeheartedly to the things that you shared today. So I appreciate you for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So thank you all for joining us on Faith and Fire today. If you or anyone that you know is suffering or is thinking about suicide or needs help with mental health, I'm going to drop some resources in here for you, because this is a deep conversation and I want you to have a place that you can go. So please come back, join us as we have more conversations on faith. This isn't the only topic that we need to be talking about, although we should be talking about this more. Join us on the next episode of Faith and Fire. We'll have more conversations on how our faith shows up in our everyday lives. See you next time.